Within hours of a single announcement in the summer of 2018, a publicly traded company's stock price jumped so fast it added more than $1 billion in market value in a single trading session. No product launch. No merger. No new CEO. Just one football transfer confirmation, and Juventus's share price exploded like the club had struck oil. Financial analysts unconnected to football at all found themselves writing notes trying to explain the surge to investors, some openly admitting they had never modeled a single athlete's transfer as a market-moving event before. That's how much the football world underestimated what was about to happen when Cristiano Ronaldo decided, at 33 years old and fresh off winning his fourth Champions League title with Real Madrid, to leave Spain for Italy. The question nobody could answer at the time still doesn't have a simple answer now. Why would the best player in the world walk away from a dynasty to join a club that hadn't even reached a Champions League final in over 20 years without losing it? To understand the decision, you have to separate what fans assumed from what was actually happening behind the scenes. The public narrative was simple: Ronaldo wanted a new challenge. That explanation wasn't false, but it was incomplete, and it conveniently ignored a much messier situation unfolding in Spain that most casual fans never fully connected to the transfer timing. Piecing together the real motivation requires looking at three separate threads that were all tightening around the same few months in 2018: a legal battle, a bruised sense of appreciation, and an ambitious Italian club willing to bet everything to change its own history. In June 2018, just weeks before the Juventus deal was announced, Ronaldo agreed to a settlement with Spanish tax authorities over allegations of tax fraud related to image rights income during his Real Madrid years. He accepted a suspended prison sentence and paid a substantial fine, closing a legal case that had dragged on for years and generated a steady stream of damaging headlines. Spanish tabloids had covered every court appearance and legal filing in exhaustive detail, turning what began as a financial dispute into a recurring public spectacle that followed him to nearly every press conference during his final Real Madrid seasons, regardless of how well he was performing on the pitch. This wasn't a minor footnote. It created a backdrop of genuine institutional and personal frustration that, according to multiple reports from that period, made the idea of a fresh start outside Spain considerably more appealing than it might have seemed a year earlier. But legal trouble alone doesn't explain a transfer of this magnitude. The sporting motivation ran just as deep, and it centered on a feeling Ronaldo had reportedly expressed to people close to him, that his individual contributions at Real Madrid, despite delivering 4 Champions League titles, weren't being matched by institutional appreciation. There was also, according to some accounts from that period, a more competitive edge to his thinking, a sense that conquering Spain so thoroughly, for Champions Leagues and 4 Ballon d'Ors deep, had started to feel like a solved problem rather than an ongoing challenge, and Ronaldo had spent his entire career actively seeking out situations where he wasn't guaranteed to succeed. Real Madrid's slightly muted farewell statement compared to his triumphant 2009 arrival wasn't the cause of the transfer, but for a player whose entire career had been defined by seeking validation and proving doubters wrong, it added fuel to a decision that was already forming. Then there was Juventus's side of the story, which is arguably the more surprising half of this entire deal. Juventus had dominated Italian football for years, winning Serie title after title with almost boring predictability, 7 consecutive league titles by the time this transfer happened, a level of domestic control few clubs anywhere in Europe could match. But domestically dominant wasn't the same as European elite, and the club's Champions League record told a genuinely painful story. Fans in Turin had grown almost numb to the cycle, dominate at home for 9 months, then watch a European campaign collapse against a superior opponent in the spring, year after year, regardless of which manager or tactical system the club tried. Juventus had reached the final twice in the previous 4 seasons, in 2015 and 2017, and lost both times, the 2017 defeat coming specifically at the hands of Ronaldo's own Real Madrid, a 4-1 demolition in Cardiff where he personally scored twice against them. That night in Cardiff, in fact, is often cited as the emotional origin point of this entire transfer saga. Juventus's players and staff watched, up close, exactly what a fully unleashed Ronaldo looked like on the biggest possible stage. And some within the club reportedly walked away from that final with a begrudging admiration that outweighed even the sting of the defeat itself. Juventus's club president, Andrea Agnelli, had reportedly watched that specific defeat and walked away with an unusual conclusion: instead of simply trying to beat this player, why not try to buy him? That idea, audacious as it sounds, wasn't just executive fantasy. Juventus had spent years building a squad specifically capable of competing at Europe's highest level, assembling a defense many considered the best in the world and reaching finals through disciplined, tactical football. Players like Giorgio Chiellini and Leonardo Bonucci had formed a defensive spine respected across the continent, yet even that level of defensive organization hadn't been enough to actually lift the trophy. What they lacked was a single individual capable of producing match-winning moments when games got tight against elite opposition, precisely the skill Ronaldo had just spent 9 years proving he possessed better than anyone alive. Agnelli's pursuit, once it became serious in early 2018, was less about ego and more about closing the exact gap that had cost his club 2 European finals in the previous 4 years. The financial mechanics of the deal were staggering by Italian football standards, even if the headline fee looked almost modest compared to Ronaldo's original 2009 move. Juventus paid Real Madrid approximately €100 million, a substantial sum but noticeably less than the record-breaking figure Real Madrid had paid 9 years earlier for the same player, a detail that briefly puzzled some observers, since a player in his 4th Ballon d'Or winning stretch might have commanded even more on the open market a decade earlier. What made the deal financially extraordinary wasn't the transfer fee itself, but the wage structure. Ronaldo signed a contract reportedly worth over €30 million per year net, an unprecedented commitment for Serie A, a league that had never come close to competing with Premier League or La Liga wages at that level before. Juventus's ownership justified the enormous financial commitment through a calculation that went beyond matchday performance entirely. Ronaldo's global commercial appeal, backed by hundreds of millions of social media followers and a brand recognized in markets Serie A had never meaningfully penetrated, represented a marketing opportunity Italian football hadn't seen in decades. Within days of the announcement, Juventus reportedly sold an extraordinary volume of the new number 7 shirt, generating revenue figures that some analysts suggested could offset a meaningful portion of the transfer fee almost immediately, purely through merchandise alone. Broadcast partners in Asia and North America, markets where Serie A had historically struggled for attention compared to the Premier League or La Liga, reportedly reported measurable increases in viewership specifically tied to matches Ronaldo appeared in, a commercial ripple effect that extended well beyond Italy's own domestic television deals. The presentation itself, while smaller in scale than Real Madrid's 2009 spectacle, still drew tens of thousands of fans to the Allianz Stadium in Turin, a crowd size unheard of for a Serie A unveiling. Local and international media covered the event with an intensity typically reserved for World Cup finals rather than a single player's introduction. Season ticket renewals reportedly spiked immediately following the announcement, and the club's official app saw registration numbers surge to levels the marketing department had never planned infrastructure for, forcing last-minute technical upgrades just to handle demand. For a league that had spent years watching its best young talents get poached by Premier League and La Liga clubs, Ronaldo's arrival represented something almost symbolic, proof that Italian football could still attract, rather than only lose, the very best players in the world. Adjusting to Serie A football, however, wasn't instant. Italian defending had a reputation for tactical discipline and physicality distinct from what Ronaldo had faced in Spain for nearly a decade, and his first several matches drew mixed reviews from pundits questioning whether the transition would go as smoothly as everyone assumed. He went scoreless in his opening matches for the club, a drought that, while brief in retrospect, generated an outsized amount of media scrutiny simply because expectations attached to his arrival had been set impossibly high from day one. Once he found his rhythm, though, the doubts evaporated quickly. Ronaldo finished his debut Serie A season with 21 league goals, helping Juventus secure yet another domestic title, extending a streak that had already made the club a fixture at the top of Italian football. He broke individual scoring records along the way and became, almost immediately, one of the most statistically dominant forwards Serie A had witnessed in years, silencing questions about whether age or league adjustment would finally slow him down. Opposition coaches who had spent the summer publicly downplaying the threat he posed to Italian defenses found themselves privately redesigning entire tactical setups around a single opposing player, a level of respect few forwards in Serie A history had commanded so immediately. But domestic dominance was never the point of this transfer, and everyone connected to the deal knew it. Juventus hadn't spent this kind of money, restructured this much of their wage budget, and staged this level of spectacle just to win another Serie A title they were already comfortable winning most years anyway. The entire gamble existed for one specific purpose: finally winning the Champions League, the trophy that had eluded the club since 1996. And this is where the story takes its most surprising turn, one that most fans conveniently forget when discussing this era of Ronaldo's career. Despite genuinely spectacular individual moments, including a stunning hat-trick against Atlético Madrid in a 2019 Champions League comeback that remains one of the most electric European nights Juventus fans have ever experienced, the trophy Juventus signed Ronaldo specifically to win never actually arrived. That night against Atlético deserves its own mention. Juventus trailed 2-0 from the first leg, and Ronaldo scored all 3 goals in the return fixture himself, a complete performance hat-trick that briefly convinced an entire fanbase their Champions League drought was finally about to end. It didn't. Juventus were eliminated in the quarter-finals by Ajax in 2019 and fell in the round of 16 to Lyon in 2020, results that fell dramatically short of the ambitions that had justified the entire transfer in the first place. For a club that had bet its financial future on European glory, watching their marquee signing fail to deliver the one trophy that mattered most became an increasingly uncomfortable storyline as his 3-year contract wore on. There's a specific irony buried in this outcome that rarely gets discussed. Real Madrid, the club Ronaldo had just left, went on to win the Champions League again the very season after his departure, in 2018, with a squad many assumed would collapse without him. Meanwhile, Juventus, who had paid enormous sums specifically to acquire Champions League success, never got closer to the trophy during his tenure than the same quarter-final and round of 16 exits the club had already been producing before he arrived. Some Italian pundits later argued that Juventus's squad, despite the individual upgrade, had actually regressed tactically in Europe during this period, over-relying on Ronaldo's individual brilliance to compensate for gaps elsewhere on the pitch that a more balanced approach might have addressed. The individual brilliance was undeniable. The collective payoff Juventus had gambled everything on simply never materialized. By the summer of 2021, with his contract entering its final year and questions mounting about whether the Juventus project had actually achieved its core objective, speculation about Ronaldo's future intensified once again. The Italian tax and financial landscape had also shifted, with a special tax incentive scheme that had made his original move to Serie A financially attractive facing scrutiny and eventual changes that altered the calculus behind staying in Italy long-term. Meanwhile, the COVID-19 pandemic had reshaped football's finances entirely during his final Juventus seasons, hitting Serie A's broadcast revenue particularly hard and forcing the club to reconsider its top-heavy wage structure at exactly the moment questions about the transfer's return on investment were already growing louder inside the boardroom. What had started as a billion-dollar stock market surge and a symbolic statement about Italian football's continued relevance was quietly heading toward an ending nobody had scripted when the deal was first announced 3 years earlier. Looking back at this chapter of Ronaldo's career, what stands out isn't the failure to win the Champions League, striking as that outcome was against the scale of investment involved. It's the fact that Ronaldo, at 33 years old, an age when most elite forwards begin visible decline, chose the harder path entirely, leaving a dominant, trophy-laden situation in Spain to prove himself in an unfamiliar league, under new tactical demands, carrying the weight of an entire club's stalled European ambitions on his shoulders. He delivered individually, breaking records and producing moments Serie A fans still discuss with genuine reverence. The collective trophy simply refused to follow him to Turin. Perhaps that's the most honest way to summarize these 3 years in Italy, a marriage built on solving each other's biggest problem, his need for reinvention, their need for a European breakthrough, where one side of the bargain was kept in full, and the other quietly, stubbornly, never arrived. And that gap between individual brilliance and team destiny was about to become the defining question of the next, entirely unexpected chapter of his career.